Hi, this is Gayle, and today I want to give you a little quick tip on threading and best practices for your Bernina 4 through your 7 series machines. So let's have a look, starting with thread and the different spool caps. There's a lot of questions about the right way to put certain types of thread on the machine. So let's just try to help you out a little bit. First of all, most of your Berninas, and these are any new Berninas in the line, from the 215 to the 3 series, 4 series, 5 series, they have these foam pads, and you typically get 2 of them, but it does vary a little bit between, what model you might have gotten. So there is the horizontal spool pin that, we recognize because it's the horizontal spool pin, and wherever the thread goes, the foam pad first goes on. Then there's that vertical spool pin, and on some models you have to clip it on, and on other models it swings up. And wherever the thread goes there, the foam pad goes first. Now, if you are using a vertical spool pin, you do not use your spool caps. And here is the small, medium, and large spool caps. And typically the flat piece of the spool cap goes against the top of the thread, unless you're working with this little guy, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So which threads go on horizontally and which threads go on vertically? Well, let's talk a little bit about how the thread is wound. So we have the stack wound thread, and this is a sulky blendables thread, and I picked it because it's variegated, and you can see that there's no crisscrossies on this spool. So this spool should go on vertically. And when the thread unwinds from the spool, it should unwind spinning clockwise. So you can see in this position, if this were to unspin, it would go counterclockwise. So that means we're going to turn this upside down, and this thread is going to spin clockwise. So this is the correct position for this thread to go on the vertical spool pin. And once again, no spool cap because you want it to freely pull. Another thread that's going to go on the vertical spool pin would be any thread like this, which is stack wound. Now, this is a smaller spool of bottom line thread from Superior, and you can see that it's stacked. In fact, a lot of Superior threads are stack wound and will go on vertically with the spool pin like this. Now, what threads go on horizontally? Well, that would be any thread that's cross wound, and here is some Mettler 50 weight silk finish thread, and it's going to go on with the medium spool cap like this vertically. Now, there's always the great debate in your house, right? Whether the toilet paper goes on coming from underneath like this, or if it goes on with the thread coming, or the toilet paper going over. Well, the thread theoretically is to go over with the spool cap on like this. And see how that spool cap lines up very nicely with that thread. Here's a larger spool of Mettler silk finish, 50 weight, 100% cotton thread. So look at this, it comes over, but this time we're going to need to use this spool cap. Let's talk about the spool cap going flat against the thread sometimes, and this is a very old spool of bottom line thread, very old. But if you look there, there's this little notch in here, and there might be times where you don't want to put the thread on vertically, or you just want to put it on horizontally or whatever. That's when I make an exception to my rule, and I'll cradle the top of my thread here with my spool cap, so no thread as it comes off the spool is going to get stuck on any little imperfections on the thread spool. Okay, so a lot of you use Aurifil thread. Aurifil thread is a 50 weight cotton thread, and it comes on these iconic orange spools. And you might also have noticed sometimes you get a new spool of thread and you don't know, how do I get that thread out? Well, did you know the bottoms of these threads come off like that? Anyway, so the thread goes on like this and over, and this time we would use our little small spool cap on there, right into position like that. And sometimes you might have an Aurifil spool that if you put it on, the thread is coming under like this, and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do about that? Well, remember how I told you the bottom comes off? You could just switch the bottom, and then your spool's going to be situated the correct way to be on your machine. Okay, along those same lines, Mettler has a large spool of metrazine thread, and it comes on these little red tubes like this. Well, this is another case where it goes on like this. You know, always the foam pad, even with the Aurifil, just a reminder. And then we attach it like this with the thread coming over like so. Finally, there's isocord thread, and isocord thread also goes on this way. First the foam pad, then the isocord, and then this, and then the thread pops over the top like this. All right, now that we know how to put the thread on, it's time to thread through the thread take up and some best practices for where you want your needle, where you want your presser foot, and all of those good things. Now, before we get further down the line here, I want to make a comment. This little nubbin right here, this isn't to be used for regular threading. You use this when you're using the multiple spool rack, and you use this when you're winding a bobbin while the needle is still thread. So it is a no-no to go from your spool back here like that. Do not do that. Okay. Also, if for some reason your thread is on backwards, your machine will probably sew quite lovely and quite fine. But remember, these are best practices. So now once you have your thread on with the appropriate spool cap and the right way determined by how I just showed you, we're going to make sure that we put the thread back here behind this little clip. Then we want to make sure that our presser foot is up. Putting the presser foot up releases the tension discs right here on the machine. So as I place that thread down in those discs, they're open and able to receive the thread. When the presser foot is down, the tension discs are tight, and sometimes it's hard to get the thread right down in there. Now, another step is if you are a hand wheel turner and you feel that the machine is not landing with the needle in the highest position, or you think that you need to turn this hand wheel a certain way, you may not be getting the thread take up. That's what that little lever is that's going back and forth in there. I find that it's good practice to press the needle down button. That puts the needle all the way down. Press the needle down button again, and it gets into the proper seating position for threading. And yes, it did just put my presser foot down, so if you would like to raise it, you can do that. Now, we go up here and we go down the right side of that thread take up. Right side of it, and then do a little U-turn and come down the other side so that it sits right in that thread take up. If it doesn't get threaded in the thread take up, your machine will cut the thread immediately when you start to sew, make a loud crunching noise, and vomit thread down below under your surface of either your embroidery or your sewing project. This thread take up is a 7 series one. So there's only that little metal piece that goes up and down in there. On the 5 series and some other models, there is a black kind of cozy on the thread take up. And when you place your thread doing that U-turn formation, you need to go in between the black piece and the right side of the chrome piece and in, and then do your U-turn and bring it in. Otherwise, it's easy to miss. Then you go down through here, and there's a little guard right under the needle, just here. And then there's another at the top of the needle. Now, those of you that are using a 5 series or a 3 series, I believe, have a little bar that you put the thread on under that area. Now we're going to use the needle threader. So we just get the thread under that little finger of the needle threader, and I'm just gently holding my thread with my right hand and pushing down on the needle threader with my left. And notice how I went kind of halfway down there. That allows me still space to get my thread under that little finger. Then I push very firmly, hold the thread in front of the needle, just in that little slot right in front of the needle. Then I bring the thread towards myself, giving it some slack, and then I let go with both hands, and then I have a long little thread that I can pull through. Well, I hope this was valuable information for you. You know, the devil's in the details, isn't it? And if you want to see more tutorials like this one, don't forget to check out our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville, and there you can like, comment, and subscribe. Happy threading.